أكبر. الله الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الله الله. Don't stay in the cold. Wait till Mama comes out. You know Mama's gonna pray Maghrib, Isha, all the Sunan. Yes. She's gonna be done after my class, I'm sure. But find a way to talk to her.
What?
Find a way to see her first before you go. I don't want you standing outside. और कैसे हैं आप?
बस ठीक है। आप कहाँ गए थे?
मैं गया था बहन के साथ गया था मैं बहामास आइलैंड।
अच्छा
अभी सीधे एयरपोर्ट से आ रहे हैं।
कैसा था?
अच्छा था वहाँ जोर असर वहाँ पड़ी है
अच्छा
सीधे आए वहाँ तो मच्छरों ने तंग कर दिया मच्छरों ने वहाँ 85 डिग्रीज एवरेज टेम्परेचर सूरज सनबर्न बुरा हाल कर दी मच्छरों ने काट दी यहाँ पहुँचे सर यहाँ आइस विंटर हुआ पिछले पूरे हफ्ते ऐसे था या आज जो है ज़रा ज़्यादा सर्दी है?
आज कल रात को हुआ था
अच्छा
विंड एडवाइजरी थी 6 बजे तक।
तो हाँ जहाज भी हमारा 1 घंटा डिले हुआ इसकी वजह से।
अच्छा
जब आ रहा था काफ़ी टर्बुलेंस थी बाहर के सामने।
क्या करें स्टूडेंट्स कम हो गए। तो ये पूरी बुक
नहीं ये मैं एक कोई नाम मुझसे में कुछ हिस्सा ट्रांसलेट किया आई थिंक फर्स्ट हाफ आधी किताब है तो लेकिन अगर आपने पढ़नी है ज़्यादा अगर उर्दू पढ़ते हैं उर्दू भी अच्छा तरह पूरा है अरबी में भी है अरबी में ओरिजिनल है लेकिन ये इंग्लिश ज़रा डिफरेंट स्टाइल की हाफ ऑफ द बुक है।
वापस उर्दू में पढ़ेंगे?
नहीं उर्दू तो मुझे इतनी प्रैक्टिस नहीं है उर्दू की वो PDF है मेरे पास अगर आप सही मैं आपको ईमेल कर सकता हूँ PDF फॉर्मेट में है मेरे पास।
इलेक्शन का बात ही नहीं क्या हुआ फिर?
हाँ वो इलेक्शन रिजल्ट सुन के हम भागे उधर तो कोई ना TV कोई खबर देखी है। टफ टाइम आ रहा है बस होना के लिए यार कोई बेहतरी होगी इंशाल्लाह।
अच्छा
टफ टाइम तो आएगा वो तो कोई शक नहीं है।
अच्छा रजिस्ट्रेशन वगैरह ये
पता नहीं क्या कुछ करेंगे लेकिन टफ टाइम ये हमें ज़रा जागने की ज़रूरत है। हम बहुत देर से सो रहे हैं हमारी कम्युनिटीज़ भी बहुत देर से
थोड़ा इमाम सर का भी हो जाता है बिहार बीच में।
हाँ
मेरा आज का सर्विकल स्पाइन का इशू चल रहे हैं,
मुझे
नेक एंड शोल्डर का पेन।
MRI कराए,
ये
MRI कराए,
वो थेरेपी करवा रहा हूँ आजकल।
MRI कराए।
नहीं वो बस अपना एक्सरे वाला हुआ था,
अच्छा
नजर आया ऑर्थोपेडिक सर्जन।
Yeah, sure.
क्या रीज़न क्या होगी?
में वो होगा जैसे कंप्यूटर पे बैठते हैं हम लोग, मे बी वो भी जाओगे।
MRI में सही पता चलता है, एक्सरे में तो कुछ नहीं आता, मोटा कट है।
सारा यहाँ तक पेन कि नम हो जाती थी ना।
वो डिस्क का मसला होता है, MRI में पता है पिंच नर्व होती है, डिस्क herniation हो जाती है, उसके लिए वो कॉलर पहनना पड़ता है। खासा वजह कंप्यूटर इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं इशू और सर्वर को कॉलर आता है,
वो भी मैंने
मुझे
मंगवा
1 घंटे पहनने काफ़ी फ़र्क पड़ता है।
परमानेंट मार्कर तो नहीं है?
थेरेपी से फर्क पड़ रहा है।
हाँ थेरेपी में तो
करनी क्लास 3 स्टूडेंट्स
It's up to you, आप
वो
बताएं।
और भी आ रहे हैं
अरे
ऊपर है ना, अगर कुछ लोग
ये अदनान नहीं आए?
ऊपर से भी लोग नमाज पढ़ रहे थे।
Okay. हाँ हाँ there is correct.
But sir, we are watching every day. You cannot escape from us. You are.
ईमेल आती थी आपको टेक्स्ट नहीं आता?
This is called privacy 101. Since I don't have your telephone number, I have your email address. On my phone, I am texting you to your email. So sending you email. अगर अपना फोन दे दें ये नहीं होगा। कोई नहीं
शुरू करते हैं इंशाल्लाह, थोड़ा सा like 10 minutes कर लेते हैं आज।
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that's good. Sure, 10 minutes. बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम, अल्हम्दुलिल्लाहि रब्बिल आलमीन, वस्सलातु वस्सलामु अला रसूलिल करीम व अला आलिहि व सहबिहि अजमईन, अम्मा बअद. So today we're going to start the actual class, the actual chapter itself. As I mentioned, as you know, the class is about this chapter is called Bab Haqiqat as-Sa'ada. So the chapter is about this whole idea, the reality. Haqiqat means reality of Sa'ada or Sa'ada in Arabic. So Sa'ada in Arabic, like, so this is a, so as I mentioned, the first half of the book is about very basic concepts. And then the second half is very specific things, like we mentioned, we went through that chapter. So the basic topics are like this. This is the fourth discussion. This is the fourth major chapter. So, so he's going to talk about from his perspective, from his experience, from his knowledge, from all the different fields that he's an expert in. He's going to talk about Sa'ada, which is happiness, is translated as bliss, felicity. The idea with Sa'ada is there's one thing that's just a pure emotion, that's just being happy or being overjoyed. In Arabic you can call that farah, or other words also. But Sa'ada is a little deeper than just like being happy, like, you know, you're happy that you know, class is cancelled, for instance. That gives you a little bit of, or school is cancelled, the snow days for children. That gives you happiness. So that's a general happiness. But Sa'ada in Arabic is very much deeper. To understand Sa'ada is real happiness. It's the real happiness that comes from inside, and that's lasting, that's everlasting, not something temporary. So Sa'ada is very important topic. Everyone's interested in this topic. Philosophers are interested in this topic. So if you look at all the Greek philosophers, Socrates, Plato, all the greats, this is one of the major things they're interested in and talking about. Also, politicians are interested in this topic. You might think, what does politics have to do with it? If you look at our country, America, the founding fathers, they actually talked about happiness, and it's part of the Constitution. Remember, there's a phrase, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the founding fathers, they had a certain idea and vision and philosophy, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, George Washington. So they were guided by this idea and they put it down on paper. The purpose of life is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So this is a major thing even behind the foundation of America. And of course, people of religion and people of Allah, people of God, all religions have some idea of happiness, of bliss, sa'ada. So obviously this is such an important concept. Shah Waliullah is not going to leave it alone. So it's a major concept in our religion. So we're going to go through just a few lines to see how he starts the discussion and just to get an idea of how he's thinking and what he's saying about it. So Shah Waliullah, you can start with happiness with a verse from Quran or hadith or something like that. But Shah Waliullah, he's a philosopher. So because he's a philosopher, he's going to start in a different direction. So he's going to start talking about something so basic. From a direction, you might think, okay, what is he talking about? And he's building up slowly to where he wants to bring you. So he says, "I'lam, Bismillah." The first thing he says, "I'lam anna lil insan kamalan taqtadihi suratu an-naw'iyya wa kamalan yaqtadihi mawdu' an-naw' min jins al-qarib wal-ba'id." This is very tough Arabic. He said, know that human beings have perfection. So human beings have perfection. So now he's even beyond Sa'ada. First he's going to a higher concept, perfection, kamal. Insan or human beings have kamal. And he said there's different types of perfection that they have. One is that perfection that's required by the specific form, and the second perfection required by the position of the human species in terms of the proximate and remote genus. Okay, that's very deep. So basically what he's saying is, so the higher concept is kamal, or perfection, right? I'll put the Arabic, kamal. Okay? And he said human beings have one kamal that's general and one kamal that's specific. Okay. Now this statement, if anybody studied Greek philosophy or Greek logic, this is pure Platonic philosophy. This is how they talk. This is how everything is situated. So they talk about life is full of categories. So philosophers, what they do, they just sit down and they think and they start talking. This means this means that. What is this light? What is the wall? What is the darkness? And they just start putting all these categories. So one of the things in Greek philosophy, everything begins with categorization. There's an obsession with categorization. So everything that they talk about, first they define it. So they define what is a pen and what is that definition. So they make these categories of successive ranks. So he's going to define human beings with that and talk about happiness through that Neoplatonic Greek way of thinking. So this is one of the criticisms of Shah Waliullah. Like his statements, and sometimes when his discussions are so advanced and so complex, you might read it and think, you know what, why are you saying all this? Just there's a better way or easier way, just get to the point. This is how you, but we're studying this chapter and this is how he's going to approach it. So he says basically human beings have a perfection that's specific to their form, which is their species, and a general perfection that's shared by others. That's what he's meaning to say. And then he says, وَسَعَادَتُهُ الَّتِي يَضُرُّهُ فَقْدُهَا وَيَقْصُدُهَا أَهْلُ الْعُقُولِ الْمُسْتَقِيمَةِ قَصْدًا مُؤَكَّدًا هُوَ الْأَوَّلُ. So he says the real happiness is the one that, if you don't have it, is detrimental to human beings. And anyone who has a sound mind, they strive for it, is the first one. The first one. And this is the first. Actually, I put it reverse. Number 1 and number 2. Okay. Now, so now to get into specifics, he says, this is because بصفات يشارك فيها الأجسام المعدنية. He said, when you look at a human being, you can praise him for certain things. So Kamal, coming back to this perception of Kamal, he says you can praise a human being for many things, but sometimes you praise a human being for things that are shared by mineral bodies. So أجسام المعدنية. So he said you can praise a human being for being tall or being strong. And he says that's shared by, so he places human beings in one category called mineral bodies, أجسام المعدنية. You might think, okay, mineral bodies, what does that mean? That means, now the philosophers, when they're thinking the mountains are mineral bodies, human beings are mineral bodies, the trees are mineral bodies, so those tangible objects. So he says human beings, they belong to this category called mineral bodies or tangible objects, things that have a form, surah, okay? It's very complex, so just bear with me. We're going to work through how he's thinking and what he's saying. So examples he gives, tallness or height, عظم القامة, the ability to stand straight. He says, فَإِنْ كَانَتِ السَّعَادَةُ هَذِهِ فَالْجِبَالُ أَتَمُّ سَعَادَةً. So now, you might say, what does it have to do with happiness? He says, so if these qualities, like height, right? If these qualities were the source of sa'adah or happiness, then the mountains would be the most happy. They would possess this quality the most. So they would be the most happy objects in the world. So that's very strange. You're like, okay, if tallness is something to do with happiness, the mountains would be happier than humans. It sounds very silly, but this is how philosophers think, and that's how Greek philosophy is. So the first thing he says, so this is the first category, and then the second he says, وَصِفَاتُ يُشَارِكْ فِيهَا النَّبَاتِ. Now there's a higher category called nabat, which are growing bodies. Now this is how Socrates, Plato, they thought. So they said, okay, you have bodies in the world, then you have some bodies that grow. So now that you know what they're trying to do, okay, what's going to distinguish human beings from mountains? They'll say, okay, well, human beings grow, mountains don't grow, right? So that's one way of looking at it. So they said the second category is you have bodies that don't grow and bodies that grow. So human beings will fall in this category, it's a higher category. So he says there's some things that, you know, in this category are praiseworthy qualities. So he says, كَالنُّمُو الْمُنَاسِبُ وَالْخُرُوجِ إِلَى الدَّخَلِ. So he says, what are these? The ability to grow, the ability to sprout into interesting designs. So he says, if this was a source of happiness, or radiant faces and things like that, if this is a form of happiness, فَإِنْ كَانَتِ السَّعَادَةُ هَذِهِ فَالشَّقَائِقُ وَالْأَوْرَادُ أَتَمُّ سَعَادَةً. So he says, if this is a source of happiness, then the happiest in this category would be the roses and the flowers, even more than human beings. So we went from mountains now to roses and flowers, a second category. Okay, now he's going to build up to the higher category. And then he says there are categories that, so there's haywan. The higher category is haywan, or animals, right? So now growing bodies, you have plants. Now to distinguish plants from animals, animals would have like, you know, they walk, they have, they're mammals or reptiles. So he says, then there's a higher category for animals. And human beings share some qualities with haywan, or animals. And what are these qualities? Examples, كشدة البطش والجهروية الصوت. So being strong in body, having a loud voice, and things like that. You know, having a voracious appetite, and anger, and jealousy. And he says if these are the source of happiness, then he says the donkeys will be the most happiest in this category. وَالْحِمَارُ أَتَمُّ سَعَادَةً. So if like just physical strength, brute strength, and just things like that, or loud voice, you know, this is in this category. So he said then the donkeys would surpass us in happiness. So he's building up to what real happiness is, right? Mineral bodies, growing bodies, animals, okay? And then he says, وَصِفَاتْ يَخْتَصُ بِهَا الْإِنسَانِ. And then there are some qualities that are humans, so human species. That's a higher category. And philosophers, when they say higher category, they call it, so they say al-jismun nami. This is al-jismun ma'adani, jismun nami. This is haywan. And then higher category, how do they define a human being? Haywan al-natiq, a talking animal. So the only difference between humans and animals in this category is the ability to speak. So now human beings are haywan al-natiq. So if you read any work of Islamic philosophy or Ghazali, Fakhruddin Razi, Shah Wali, anyone who's influenced by philosophy, you'll see all these names and categories, mineral bodies and talking animal, and it's very Platonic. So this is one of the criticisms of this, that Islamic tradition, our best scholars were heavily influenced by Socrates and Plato and their thought, in different shapes and forms. So it's a very Greek philosophical way of looking at things. So now he says human beings. So he says human beings have happiness, have certain qualities that they share in that whole species. What are these? كالأخلاق المهذبة, like civilization. والارتفاقات الصالحة, the ability to organize. So civilization, the ability to organize. And then he says والصناعة الرفيعة, the ability to produce things like buildings and just engineering and building and things like that. So he says all of these things are part of the human species because they have an intellect. So he says those people who are badi ra'i, who don't really think, they think this is the source of happiness. So someone who's an inventor, who's a scientist, who's the best builder, that's true happiness, and that's what they strive to go for in human beings. So he says that is a source of happiness, but it's not real happiness. It's superficial happiness. So he's building up to this level, and then he's going to get into even from here. He's going to build into what Sa'ada is, and is going to start making more sense. I think I'll stop here. This is very heavy. Yes.
What's the, I would say, the logic or the understanding behind some of these scholars to attract Muslim Ummah, because he's a Muslim scholar, right?
Mm-hmm.
From this angle, and the other ones come up with the basic understanding of what they learned from the Hadith and the Quran and from their stories and building the understanding of Islam. Whereas this Shah Waliullah is bringing from the philosophical side. What brings them from this angle to what makes them think to explain?
That this is a better way of explaining things than another.
Because to understand this aspect itself is not for everybody, I think. Like
Sure.
Not everybody will not be on board from this angle. So one thing for sure, the masses will not be following this angle.
Sure.
So is it in their mind that this is not for the masses, this is for the high intellectual ones who might not be coming on board from this angle, attract them from this side?
That's a very deep question. It's a very good question. So, what makes some scholars go in this direction versus other directions? And the answer is, every scholar is the product of his time. So generally, Shah Waliullah is not unique, by the way. Almost every great scholar was influenced by this, with very handful of exceptions. Every big name you can think of that you like, from Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari, from besides the early scholars. Early scholar would be Sahaba, Tabi'een, and the four Imams, Malik and Abu Hanifa. This is way before the Greek works were discovered. This is early on. But beyond that time, probably from like the 2nd to 3rd century of the Hijrah, what happened was the Muslim world discovered the Greek works. Okay, and the Muslim world was generally not a very anti-intellectual world. Our way of thinking was not. Our way of thinking was wherever you can find wisdom, it's all good. We absorb it. So generally, wherever Muslims went in different parts of the world, they absorbed the traditions and cultures, and they took the good things, especially when it came to knowledge and science. So what happened was, like somewhere in the 2nd to 3rd century, Hijrah century, Muslims, when they went east and all these societies embraced Islam, they brought all these ideas of their culture. But what really happened, they started translating into Arabic great works of literature from the Greek tradition, Socrates, Plato, and some of the great thinkers. And when the Muslims started reading this, they became influenced. And so some of them, they took that influence and they went really outside of Islam. And then other scholars, to fight that, so you can put Shah Waliullah. Shah Waliullah is much later, but just this style of thinking, because the whole society was influenced by that was the fashion and the trend of the times. So they saw that everyone's talking about that, they had to get involved for the sake of da'wah. And this is the language people were using at that time. So they started adopting these principles in order to defend Islam. So Shah Waliullah is not promoting Greek philosophy. Nowhere does he talk about Greek philosophy, but he's using it to build up to bring people to Quran and Sunnah in his own way, through those techniques and tools. So So that's really what happened. It's like today. Today everyone talks about, like, philosophy is dead. But what's alive today? What are the ideas everyone talks about? Democracy. Any person in the world, in the Muslim world, from Jordan to Pakistan to here, even Muslim scholars, they have to talk about democracy and representation and how Islam has. Why? Why are we so obsessed with it? Because the whole world this is the trend of the times. In order to speak the language of the times, now scholars have to speak that language. Otherwise, no one will listen. So that's why he felt a need, in order to reach all these people that are leaving Islam because it's not intellectual enough for them. They're more influenced by other ideas. They sound more fancy and intellectual. They use those to bring people to Islam. So, it's a noble intention. It works many of the times, but many times it doesn't. Many times what happens is, like today now, Greek philosophy is dead. So now when Muslims read these works, it doesn't make sense, because now the world isn't like that. Now we're living in a post-scientific world. Maybe you can say 50 years ago the trend was science. And if you notice, all the thinkers, they were talking about Islam and science, right? How Quran is compatible with science, and they started treating the Quran like a science book, like geology, like the source of all sciences in the Quran, which is bogus, because it was, the Quran didn't come to teach science. You cannot say, if you see the older generation, a lot of them still say, the source of all ulum and sciences in the world is the Quran. Which is, like astronomy, they actually say astronomy is found in the Quran. Psychology is found in the Quran, and this and that. The Quran didn't come for that, but because this is a world that's driven by science today, and everyone's talking about, it's a post-Darwin world. So even the Muslims started using that language in order to defend Islam. But it works for many people, but it also has some downfalls. So the downfall of that is, now it's outdated. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and sometimes you start using the language, you start getting influenced by that. So there's probably a better way of saying it today. So, that's how all Islamic works are. Even Ghazali is even worse. Shah Waliullah is the orthodox one among these philosophers. His thought is very orthodox because he brought hadith into it. So we can still read it and learn from it. If you read some of Ghazali's work, you if I didn't tell you it's Ghazali, Imam Ghazali, you like, who the hell is writing this? And you will not even pay attention. Fakhruddin Razi. Some of the things sound even heretical because they were even more deep into some of these things. So it's just, everyone's a product of his time. Allahu A'lam. Okay. Anyone else?
So what does he say? What is the actual happiness? Just give a little bit of...
Okay, yeah, so he says basically, so it's not about what's human species, but the actual happiness is when he's going to build up, there's an angelic side, malakiya inside, and a haywani side, an animal side. The actual happiness is the one that's linked to akhirah, right? So that's what he's saying. This is still worldly, like building fine things and buildings and monuments. It does bring comfort, and we all talk about our nation's taraqi, right? Development, and everyone's so happy when roads are built in Pakistan. When my father-in-law comes from Pakistan, he's so happy, whoever's the president, Musharraf ne ye kiya hai, itni sadkein banayi hai. That's happiness, that's gonna bring something to society. It's all like superficial. So the real happiness is when you look at the world in light of the next life, right? So he's gonna talk about the inner, there's two sides in every human being. And that's also part of it is philosophical. There are two competing sides, the haywani side and the malaki side, malakut and haywanat. So when the angelic side inside the human being becomes dominant over the animalistic side, that's what brings true happiness.
So there's no happiness, we should not get any happiness from the dunya? That's what he's saying?
No, he's talking about true happiness. So
No,
he's saying
so
this is
no,
happiness.
I'm saying true happiness. We
Yeah.
should not feel any true happiness from the dunya?
No, you can't. So he didn't blame this. He said being tall is a source of happiness because someone who's tall and strong, it's a source. It's a blessing of Allah. So it's something you're proud of, and it brings a little bit of joy. And then also someone who's is able to produce some things brings some happiness. Someone who has certain courage. Courage is in this category. Courage brings some true happiness. Someone who's
So
courageous.
there is true happiness in all these categories also?
Yeah, but it's a small amount of happiness.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not the happiness that the believers should strive for ultimately. although they should have all of these. And even this fine crafts and it is happiness.
Okay.
But it's not true happiness, because if you don't reach the highest level and you just stay here, then you'll find these people at the end of their life, they'll say, this was nothing. Nobody's really happy. So true happiness really is linked to akhirah. But so another way of looking at it, that's a good question, because there's a hadith of the Prophet, arba'atun min as-sa'ada. So you can see how the Prophet, the way he talked about things, is very different. But the problem is, for human beings, for Muslims, it's not enough. Quran and Sunnah is not enough. If you go to the average person who's not coming to the masjid, you start quoting Quran and they're like, what are you talking about? Ya kya baatein kar rahe ho? Right? It's not enough for them. So you have to talk to them in a different language, with the language that they understand. That's why Shah Waliullah did this. So, so the Prophet said, arba'atun min as-sa'ada, 4 things are from human happiness. And he meant the worldly happiness: a big house, a righteous wife, good transportation, and what's the 4th? You got that 4th?
Good children.
It could be, yeah. I said, so good lodgings, a comfortable house, spacious house, baytun wasi', and then a animal that gets you places, which is a fast car, a good car that doesn't break down, and then a righteous spouse, someone in your house that's, if you're always fighting in your home, then there's, it's a miserable life. So these are worldly things that everyone should strive for. Neighbor, a neighbor that's good to you. So if you think about, these are 4 worldly things that the Prophet said they're part of Sa'ada. Nothing wrong with them. So, but for the Greek philosophers, you can say they look at everything in a negative way, worldly things in a negative way. So for them, it's kind of negative. For the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, these are part of Sa'ada. It's very good things to have, to aim for. But you shouldn't stop there. There's a higher level of happiness. So we'll continue talking, inshallah, in the next week. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. Okay. You have the Google group, right? Access. You can just update it.
I don't.
Oh, you don't?
Yeah,
The
there
pen
was
is-
somebody not getting an email. I don't know.
There's one person whose email was wrong. Like, it keeps bouncing back. Every week it bounces back. So, I mean, Yasin has to do it.
लेकिन वो कहते हैं कि ट्रू हैप्पीनेस नहीं है, तो इसका मतलब है कि वो तो हैप्पीनेस है, ट्रू हैप्पीनेस नहीं है, तो इसका मतलब वो हैप्पीनेस
असल हैप्पीनेस नहीं है, वो बाकी सही बात है.
इसका मतलब कि जो दुनिया में हम सारा टाइम गुजारेंगे, हमें खुश होने की कोई जरूरत नहीं है.
नहीं, आप उससे अगर ट्रू हैप्पीनेस नहीं, आप जंप करें कि नहीं करनी चाहिए. That's a little too much of a jump. True happiness नहीं है, for sure.
ओके.
लेकिन थोड़ी बहुत